Won't you spare me over till another year? Well, what is this that I can't see with ice cold hands taking hold of me? Well, I am deaf, none can excel. I'll open the door to heaven or hell. Oh, death, someone would pray. Could you wait to call me another day? The children prayed, the preacher preached, time and mercy out of your reach. Death, I come to take the soul, leave the body and leave it cold, to drop the flesh off of the frame. Dirt and worm both have a claim. Oh, death. Oh, death. Won't you spare me over till another year? Won't you spare me over till another year? Won't you spare me over till another year?
Hey everyone, my name's Chris,
I'm Courtney.
I'm Preston.
and welcome to Kindred UMC's live show, our quarantined live show. This is the second week in our series on the book of Job, where we're examining suffering in a modern world. And if you are interested in our previous discussion from last week, because we're going to be picking up a little bit after that, I'll link the previous video in the description. It was a dress rehearsal, kind of, so we worked out some of the kinks technologically speaking, and this week should be much, much better. And obviously, if you enjoy the content, it would help us out a lot if you would subscribe and like and share this video as much as possible. I don't know if you can see Jonah in the shot, but he was born to be a star and is my good boy. So how you guys doing?
Good.
Good.
I liked your enthusiasm on suffering. That was great.
Yes, suffering.
Suffering today?
It's the biggest question that matters the most to most people, I think. Like, how do you make sense of, and can you reconcile? Because there's like only a couple ways out of it, you know, or a few ways out of it.
Can you the whole, or can you the singular?
Individually, can you alone, because that's where it has to start. Can you rectify and like consolidate purpose and life is good and there's a reason for what's going on, and really pointless, horrible, suffering things happen? What the heck is that?
I was trying to silence my watch.
And instead you did the "Where's my iPhone?"
The loudest voice possible.
Yep. I did. Sorry about that.
This is going to be my live show. I'm going to leave it in.
All right,
I'm
great.
gonna leave it in.
Wonderful.
Cue.
People will be
What you
surprised.
get is what you get.
It's like a Preston cueing a Seth Rogen laugh, and nobody expects
I
it.
was going to do it, but no, I'm not.
So
Darn.
last week we talked about the devil and God making this bargain and bet over Job's soul, basically.
Oh, we didn't really touch on that. I mean, we did, but we kind of jumped off.
Well, so the reason we did is because my whole take on this is you have to think of this book of Job not like literal descriptions of God and Satan and
Well,
what's
like
happening.
the lower E stuff.
Yeah, you have to think of it like Shakespeare. You have to think of it like a drama. This is so
Like a movie plot.
Well, so one of the things we're going to talk about this week is there are other people who are important to Job who, in the midst of testing Job, these people just get wiped out. And so if it was real life, your immediate thought ought to be, if you're like a conscious person who has like empathy for other humans should be something along the lines of, wait a minute, what about all those other people? Like, that's a horrible thing. So for this one guy, all these people had to die? But if you were watching like Hamlet or Macbeth, and all these characters die so that our hero can go through some kind of a tragedy or some kind of a transformative experience, it would never even occur to you because they're not real people. You know?
Sure.
And so I think it's really important to engage this story that way. Because, so like, to think of the God character, the devil character, the sons and daughters characters, because it's almost certain that this wasn't a literal happening. You know, there may have been a guy named Job who some bad stuff happened to, but like this was written in poems, this was written in story structure. This probably, I mean, it's almost certain that this did not literally happen this way. So as we're about to get into like, and that's kind of the answer to the devil God bet thing, you know, because otherwise it's like, it's really nasty behavior on God's part. You know, like, what kind of a God do you want to worship where this God's like, all right, do whatever you want to him so that we can prove that I'm good. You're like, this is a caricature of somebody trying to make sense of what happens suffering wise in life.
And not to stay here too long, but the question,
all day, babe.
The question really was, is Satan Satan or is Satan the angel back and the lore stuff? And if it was, then it's a totally different conversation. It's not, you are this opposite of me and I'm teaching you how good I am because you think I'm not and you think you can get me.
Yeah.
Or it's a teachable moment to a
It's
right
like
hand.
what did you call him? Lucifer.
It's
the angel Lucifer being taught about righteousness.
Yes, it's not only can humans be taught, but others who are above.
Here's the thing. Here's the answer to that. Here's as quick as I can be. One, Satan is called the accuser. That's what Hel Satan in Hebrew. It's the accuser. The things that you're talking about, Lucifer and the guardian, the angel stuff, all that is narrative that happened post Christ. That's like common era stuff, CE, not BCE. This story was written about 600 years before Christ, or BCE, before common era, and nobody had that lore or that narrative because it's a decidedly Catholic narrative.
Okay.
So what you're saying, if you were coming at this from a literal standpoint, you would have to reconcile all of that stuff. But instead, we're going to come at this from a literary standpoint because I think that's how it was intended originally. Like, it's not a history book; it's a poem about suffering, and so. No, I don't think anybody who originally read this or who wrote this or who edited this together would have even had that as a thought or a question in their mind. They would have known God good, the accuser is this evil spirit that wants bad things but doesn't have the power to do them, so he has to approach God and like make a deal with God before he can do anything. So God's sovereignty in this, God's power and control over things and ability to allow or not allow things is actually a really important question in the whole book. Because again, that's one of the ways to address suffering is to say there's no God, there's no powerful being. That's why suffering happens. It's all random. Of course, I think there's deeper meaning to be had because I'm a pastor. So I'm going to side with the way that includes God. So let's pick up where we left off. This is Job chapter 1, starting at verse 13. And I'm going to skip some bits because they literally repeat exactly what was written in the first chapter. So Job chapter 1, verse 13. This is after they've made a deal and Satan is like allowed to go and punish Job. One day when his sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in the eldest brother's house, which, if you remember, that was something they often did. They partied together. A messenger came to Job and said, "The oxen were plowing and the donkeys were feeding beside them, and the Sabeans fell on them and carried them off and killed the servants with the edge of the sword. I alone have escaped to tell you." Sabeans are just foreign enemies. So While he was still speaking, while the messenger was still speaking, another came and said, "The fire of God fell from heaven and burned up the sheep and the servants and consumed them. I alone have escaped to tell you." While he was still speaking, another came and said, "The Chaldeans formed 3 columns, made a raid on the camels and carried them off, and killed the servants with the edge of the sword. I alone have escaped to tell you." While he was still speaking, another came and said, "Your sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their eldest brother's house. And suddenly a great wind came across the desert, struck the 4 corners of the house, and it fell on the young people, and they are dead. I alone have escaped to tell you." Then Job arose, tore his robe, shaved his head, which I have also done, shaved his head, and fell on the ground and worshipped. Tearing the clothes and shaving the head is an act of mourning. It's a traditional act of grief. So he's lost all of his property and his sons and daughters. So again, the trick here is, if these were real people, we would have to address that. What about these poor young people? But in the culture and in the drama of the narrative, they're kind of viewed and lumped in as just an extension of all that Job is responsible for and owns.
Got it.
Which is a little bit, it's not exactly the way, but it's a little bit telling of the culture. That is a little bit how the culture would have viewed it. He said, "Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked shall I return there. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord," which, by the way, is Yahweh. So Yahweh gave, Yahweh takes away, and blessed be the name of Yahweh. In all this, Job did not sin or charge God with wrongdoing. So now Satan has destroyed everything, which is an easy translation or an easy interpretation. But if you'll notice, it's 2 foreign groups and 2 natural disasters. And so the question starts to come into play, how much of this is the accuser and how much of this is also God? Which is a natural question that original readers would have asked. God is playing some kind of a part in the suffering of Job. At least that's the implication. So then it goes on to another heavenly scene where literally the words that we read last week in chapter 1 are exactly repeated verbatim. And it only adds this one thing at the end. So God and Satan are talking, and I've been to and fro on earth. Have you seen my servant? Yada, yada, yada. Then Satan answered. This is picking up chapter 2, verse 4. Then Satan answered Yahweh, "Skin for skin, all that people have they will give to save their lives. But stretch out your hand now and touch his bone and his flesh, and he will curse you to your face." So similar language, but now he's saying, yeah, it's one thing to touch his property. It's another thing if you hurt him. Like, anybody will give up everything they own to protect their lives. But what happens if you let me actually attack him? The Lord said to Satan, "Very well, he is in your power, only spare his life." So you can do anything to him, but you can't kill him. So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord and inflicted loathsome sores on Job, from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head. Job took a potsherd, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, with which to scrape himself.
Potsherd?
It's a one word, potsherd. I think it is a potsherd, but I don't actually know.
I imagine because the next word is scrape.
Yeah, something to scrape, like think of a back scratcher kind of thing. With which to scrape himself, and sat among the ashes, which is another form of grief. Then his wife said to him, "Do you still persist in your integrity? Curse God and die." What a supporting, loving woman. Lady Macbeth in the flesh. "Curse God and die." But he said to her, "You speak as any foolish woman would speak. Shall we receive the good at the hand of God and not receive the bad? In all this, Job did not sin with his lips." So, and we'll stop there. That's the kind of the end of chapter 2, but there's still more there, but we're going to get into the 3 friends next time. So, impressions, thoughts, comments, concerns, nobody's holding you to your initial thoughts either. You're allowed to change your mind.
My initial thought is, Preston, you have very messy handwriting.
It's because it's going with the story instead of...
That's, you know what? That's my bad. Let me be clear. Initial thoughts about the text.
Yeah.
I think you're right in that it's very Shakespearean.
Yeah, it's very melodramatic.
Yeah.
Everything's as extreme as it can possibly be, to make the point.
Yeah.
You wrote down a bunch over there, man.
Yeah, and it was as you're explaining it too, because I say Sabians and Chaldeans are those, again, looking at it literally instead of literarily.
Yeah.
Are they specific tribes back then that they had, like Canaanites was a big charged. Those are the Canaanites, and they're over there, and
they are traditional enemy. I don't know enough about the specific history of this time. It is important to know that Canaanites is much older than this.
Yeah.
Because now we're in what's called the post-exilic phase or era, which means that Jerusalem has already happened, King David has already happened, Solomon has already happened. All of these great historical things have already happened by the time this book was written. And in fact, the Israelite kingdom has now entered into civil war, been defeated by other major Assyrians and Babylonians, and then the Babylonians had this weird practice where, and actually it's a brilliant tactical move, when they would conquer somebody, they would exile they would conquer Jerusalem, say, and then they would say, everybody who lives in Jerusalem, who is not us, you have to go live in Babylon. You're out of here. And they would literally march them into Babylon where they would live, so that their children, they would go and breed and have children, and then the next generations would grow up Babylonian. Even though they would be Israelites and immigrants, they would be inherently loyal to Babylon because that's their home now. And so within 2 generations, you could effectively conquer an entire people and not have to worry about their ancestors coming to, or their whatever the opposite of, and their offspring coming to seek revenge or being a threat. And so then they would move a bunch of Babylonians into Jerusalem. So that's the exile. This is post-exile. So which is also important because that is a source of great suffering for the Israelites who were living in exile. They were not allowed to return to Jerusalem, which is the place where they commune with God. And that's probably one of the major reasons that this book was written. How can God be good when we have been conquered by Assyria and Babylon, and we're forced to leave our home, and the temple's destroyed, and God does not favor us anymore? How can this be any good at all? The question of suffering really matters in that setting. So I wanted to start by simply talking about John Wick. So, because a modern day Job story, in essence, is John Wick. And the premise of the movie is there's this guy who was some kind of a mob assassin, some kind of a deadly force, this really badass guy. Tragedy strikes. I don't want to spoil anything because I know Preston hasn't seen the movie.
No, I haven't even heard of this movie before.
You haven't heard of John Wick?
No.
I feel so
We
much
have
better.
talked about this.
Don't watch the second
What
one.
two
Don't watch the
types of
second one, that's
movies
all
do
I'm
I
gonna
watch? Romantic comedies and
It
comedies.
is romantic.
What type
and
of TV
comedic.
do I watch? Sitcoms, reality TV. I don't do action. I don't do Star Wars. I don't do horror.
Well,
No, thank you.
John Wick is a story of a man who has serious, and like Job has wealth and righteousness. John Wick has some serious wealth and a particular set of skills. He's got the ability to kill cleanly and effectively, and tragedy strikes, and John Wick's answer is to seek revenge on the people who caused the tragedy. And that's a very modern Job story.
how do we address suffering? We fight it and we defeat it and we take vengeance, which is one way of coping with suffering. I would argue that that's a really bad way of doing it.
Yeah.
But there's plenty of revenge stories throughout history. Like, revenge is just a natural human kind of impulse in these settings. So then, again, the question comes: if that's not the answer, then what's the proper framework?
Well, you're talking about this idea of revenge, and for me, my version of that, I'm thinking about my own experiences, and it's something that I've had to really actively work against. Is I have a natural tendency to just ice people out, and so for me, when tragedy happens, it's typically relationally because I'm an Enneagram 2, and that's important to me. When that happens, it's way easier for me to.
People who don't know about Enneagram. Her primary motivation is to be needed and wanted, and seen as valuable in that.
No, that's
socially.
3. It's wanted and loved. You were wanted and loved and needed. If I don't feel needed, I feel rejected. You were on the right track. But
I'm a wing 3, so I view wanted and needed
as valuable. Yep. So it's very easy for me to just be skirt by, don't talk to me, and just avoid.
We were talking about this
that
a little
person in public
on one of our podcast episodes, where because you and I have a similar thing. You will bend over backwards, and then something snaps. Is the way.
Yeah, whatever happens, it triggers something in me, and I'm nope, screw you, I'm done. Bye.
It's a long road to get there, but once you're there, it's pretty much over.
And then I have a very hard time letting that person or whatever back in.
Yeah. So and that's an excellent example of because when we say things like revenge, it's so easy to go cartoonish, like John Wick or some kind of violent what
Hiroshima.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
A realistic,
Yeah.
dramatic revenge story of it could have been handled a little more diplomatically.
Well,
instead of
you and I can disagree on that one.
Sure.
Certainly, the existence of nuclear weapons in the world is something that has literally terrified me.
I'm only playing devil's advocate. I would say
the accuser's advocate.
The world would not be here if I were the one to take revenge.
Oh, yeah.
But hindsight's 2020. We look back on it now of, this is so. But right then, when Pearl Harbor was hit, and the whole state of America, 98%, whatever.
And there's something to be said about. Well, here, I won't speculate about it because who knows what was going on in the heads of
it's really just an example
the decision makers. But it is a catastrophic, world-changing example of what happens when we lean into the violent response. Which is kind of what revenge is. Even though it might not be violent, it is a violent response.
And it's never equal. It's never eye for an eye. It's always eye for a. We're going to take half your body.
I'm going to make it worse.
So you can't come back and
I'm going to right. I would say so. It can be big and melodramatic like that, and that's I think what most people think when they see or think about revenge.
More oftentimes than not, though, it's not big and melodramatic.
Not at all. That's why I really love your example. I do the same thing when I get butthurt about something in a social context.
Oh my!
I shut down, and the internal and it's a cold shoulder. And the internal mechanism within me is not all right, well, I'm obviously not being helpful, so I think I'll just be passive now. That's not what it is. It is way more active than that. It's, you don't like what I'm offering? You don't like what I bring to the table? See how you do without me.
See, I do that. I do that stuff too. We've talked about that. I do that too.
It's it is an active and if everyone goes on fine without me, I'll get even more pissed.
Right.
It's worse.
Right.
No, you're missing. I'm proving the point that you guys are assholes.
You've seen me do that shit before.
Oh yeah, well, the good friend group notices it and knows it too as well and ignores it.
Well,
and then pries you later at it.
Or prods.
I'm you're being quiet. Why are you so? You're 48 degrees right now. Why is that?
Well, and there's anyway.
I don't want to talk about it.
I don't want to.
Right.
I'm with you. That is a real thing. So
I'm just tired.
So all that to say that the temptation for revenge is not some big grandiose thing. It's a very everyday thing. In very small but also very pervasive personality ways.
In traffic.
Don't
I will cut that guy
don't get
off.
me started.
It's up to us. We have
Yeah,
to teach this.
we have to do it.
Right.
They'll learn.
Yeah.
They'll learn.
But there's also so that's one kind of coping mechanism for suffering. Another here, like I made notes because like I was thinking about we have all these coping mechanisms for suffering, but like there's hardly any of them are good.
Yeah.
And so one of them is revenge. Another one is like numbness. Like, and whether that's chemical numbness, like substance abuse, or like just straight up like turning off your feelings, which is
It's learned helplessness. Is usually what it's called.
well. So I'm going to categorize that one as different
Okay.
because to me another one is escape or avoid,
Yeah.
Okay.
Escapism.
which is and so like I would classify the I can't and. My mom and I talk about that is my mom's go-to coping strategy is her I can't and I'm not able. And one of my biggest frustrations with her and when we get is into like yes you can. Like you could learn that. You just have to start incrementally learning that. Like you could be better at that. You just have to do it. You have to want to do it, you know? So avoidance, numbing, revenge, or anger, kind of a violent response. But almost all of those lead like bad. They lead to bad places.
Is that happening today?
It
Anywhere?
happens all the time, everywhere.
Anywhere like on the news or?
Well, well, what do you mean?
No. Yes, it is. That's
Yeah, absolutely.
it's a little touchy of a subject because we don't know how to approach it. And if it's not being approached the right way or isn't approached the right way, it's never going to be one. And two, it's not going to be resolved.
Well, so you're tiptoeing into what I think is this is kind of the message of the book. There's really only one way to address suffering. And it's to face it. It's to like look at it, acknowledge it, which will inherently cause more suffering. Like all of the other coping strategies, the reason they seem effective is because they allow you to not feel the pain. You can feel something else other than the pain of it.
It's like when Hamilton sings Hurricane in the musical.
Yes.
When they find out about the affair and everything that's going on, he's like, well, shit, what do I do now? And it's either I'll write my way out
Well,
or...
hold on, because people may not have seen Hamilton.
Oh.
Or ever will.
Or forget the story of Hamilton, but the actual history of Alexander Hamilton, who's one of the founding fathers. He's this prolific, amazing brain in a critical, important time who helps win the Revolutionary War, helps establish the United States as a financially credible institution with the National Bank and the Treasury Secretary's position. And he's flawed. He's an overworker who ignores his family. Mm-hmm. It leads him into an affair. And then I think it's ironic that to his answer to being blackmailed potentially to the affair is to publicize his affair.
Right.
Like, which is a perverted, corrupted, I think, example of turning to face it. But there's something there with that strategy. And then one of the things, at that pivotal moment, he recalls the story in the play. He recalls the story of when he lived through a hurricane.
Yep.
That sounds more of like if fear was the pool and you're facing that fear, you're like, all right, we're gonna go one step at a time, literally. Step, step, step. I'm in the shallow end, I can stand up. It sounds like you didn't even try the steps and just ran from the tree line and all the way
Pretty
to
much.
the deep
And then
end.
inevitably more suffering happens to him.
Yeah, and when you do that, you run the risk of like drowning.
Yeah. Yeah.
And like or destroying other people's relationships and causing more suffering for other people. So and I think the play does a good job of pointing out the selfishness of Alexander Hamilton's motivations in that moment. Like he's not trying to face it; he's trying to save his own skin, which
Yeah.
is very different.
And very human.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
and like a very, very typical kind of strategy. So I do want to talk a little bit about most of the Old Testament, the whole like pattern of the Israelite story with God, usually follows the pattern of God reaches out to people, to the Israelite people, they obey him and are like faithful to him, then things go well, they get complacent and they become disobedient, and things go poorly. And when things go poorly, the answer is almost always, what have we done to wreck our relationship with Yahweh? Which is not in and of itself a bad framework to address suffering. The first question, absolutely, when really bad things happen, the first question should be, what have I done to contribute to this? Is there something I can change to address this?
Yeah, how do we
For
be
sure.
active instead of passive in the middle of
Yeah,
it?
and that's the overwhelming majority of the Old Testament is kind of that pattern over and over again.
Isn't that the prophet cycle? Is
They're
that
a part
the
of it.
Rough term, or the
Yeah, so
rough-
the prophets are mostly in the post-exilic phase and exile phase, and they're talking to the people of Israel. We're in this mess because we did not trust God. We didn't remain faithful. We got rich and wealthy and complacent, and that's why we're here. God hasn't abandoned us. We've abandoned God. So that in and of itself is that's a really, really important framework to start with. The problem with that is, we live in a world where you are not the cause of some tragedies. We live in a world where a storm can just come and decimate your life.
I was going to say, we live in a world. We live on a
Yeah.
rock that
Right.
has things that happen without us here, whatever.
Yeah.
There's no control, and that's
Right.
another human problem.
So the faithful response to that is usually, so just follow the train of thought here, because this is a pretty typical human train of thought. If I do good, God gives me good, which is where most churches stop, and that's kind of what we're doing, is trying to fight against that. Like,
Right.
no, there's much deeper truth than that. If I do good, God does good to me. If I do bad, God does bad to me. And that's what you teach 3-year-olds, but the Bible is adult literature. Like, this is rated R, rated M for mature, So let's see if we can go a little deeper. Yeah, but what about the suffering that has nothing to do with my behavior? Is God punishing me? Is God sadistic in some way?
that's too difficult. Let's go back to 3-year-old stuff.
Yeah, well, that's what a lot of
Yeah.
people do. Avoidance.
Right.
Avoidance. So then the next thing comes: if bad things are happening to me, and it by all accounts is not my fault, is just the random happenstance or some other malicious actor, then is God in control of things? Does God have any sovereignty? If I am in a good relationship with God and bad things are happening to me, does God have any control over things at all? And that's the question. That point is what the book of Job is about. And the book of Job is writing a narrative that incorporates both. Even if you're doing well, bad things are going to happen to you. Even if you are faithful and good and do all the right things, which you never will, because we're not perfect, but even if you're in a good relationship with God, like Job was, bad things will happen to you.
Right, I think it's trying to lead away from this.
But hold on, let me finish
Sorry.
this. Because it's the synthesis of two very difficult thoughts that don't naturally coexist. So the world can be random and bad things can happen to you for no good reason. And God is still in control of that. And so the next logical thing is, so God allows random suffering or like pointless suffering? And the hard answer to that is, yeah, kinda. Like, we live in a world where even if you do everything right, storms are going to come and suffering is going to happen. And God is still in control of that. And that brings up the question of how. How could that possibly be good? How could that God work in a good and perfect and loving way? So let me pause there before I start walking a little further down that road. And this is what the whole book is about, so we won't arrive at any, I don't think, satisfying conclusions now. But how does that sit with you? Have you ever one, does it bring up any memories? Does it bring up any stories? How does it make you feel?
That's the only question atheistic and agnostic friends asks.
Yeah.
That's literally the first question. Well,
That's literally like
besides,
exactly what I was
is
thinking
Jesus
about.
real, or is this just some fairy tale? And well, there's record and stuff in Rome, blah blah. The second question is, if you believe in this all-powerful God, why isn't he giving you candy and lollipops all the time, and this and that?
I mean, I think, at least for me, it comes back, I talked about this a little bit last week, but for me, like, have I gone through hard and difficult and traumatic things? Yeah. Were they shitty? Yeah. But, like, to get to the person I am today, I don't want to say I had to go through those things, but I did go through those things, and I was able to process those emotions and that trauma, and I grew from them, and now I can use my experiences to be with other people. And so for me, everything is always going to come back to story. Your story is important. If you don't ever go through anything difficult, your story is kind of boring.
I would also, because I had a similar trajectory. I grew up in an abusive home. It carried with those coping mechanisms and the things I did to survive there, followed me into adulthood, sabotaged almost all of my relationships. I really struggled. And then long story short, through some pretty serious transformative things and communing with God and really coming to grips with, this question, I've been trying to do everything right. How could you allow this to happen? Why can't you heal me? Why can't this be better? And through really working through that with God, came to a similar place where it's like, I'm not saying I'm glad those things happened to me, but they do give me a certain ability and a power to be with other people.
Right.
I would press it even further, and I would ask you the same thing. It's not just about the other people, though.
Sure.
I gained, through that process, a deep sense of myself.
Yeah.
Like, in a good, like, fulfilling, enjoyable, like, I love who I am. Like, I don't love all of who I am. There are certainly things that I wish that I am actively working on changing and would change. If I could snap my fingers and make them different, I would. So I'm not perfect by any means, but I love being who I am.
Yeah, I was talking to actually a very close friend of mine earlier this morning who kind of knew me before I went through some of the processing and traumatic emotion stuff that we did in our discipleship group context. I was talking with her about this exactly. And I was kind of look, I'm a completely different person now. Something I learned about myself in that process and in being able to talk about those things is a year and a half ago, I was a very, very, very codependent person. I depended on other people. I needed to be needed desperately. I was living very unhealthily in that sense.
Because I'm a different personality than you, for sure. And yet, very similar, those are the things that were causing me problems.
So I was talking to this friend.
Desperateness, needing to be, why don't you love me,
right.
was how I felt.
And I was talking to this friend, and we had been very close, and we've worked through a lot of hard things, which I feel is a testament to that friendship, that we can have these hard conversations. And one of the things that I said was, look, I love you so much, I do, but I'm in a place now where I'm like you said, I feel I have a very strong sense of myself. I don't need anyone. I love you. I love my husband. I don't need my husband. I don't need this, that, or the other, fill in the blank. I am confident in who I am. I am happy in who I am. Do I still struggle? Yeah, but who doesn't? And I wouldn't trade that for the world. I was telling this friend, I was for the first time, in college, and while I was in the middle of a lot of this stuff, I had an uncanny ability to chameleon. So a lot of people didn't really know necessarily who I really was, because
it's like a high functioning alcoholic.
Yeah.
Except
I would
instead of alcoholic, it's desperate.
Yeah. I would adapt to fit the flow of the room. And now, with the stuff that we're talking about here, with the stuff that we're talking about on the podcast, I'm putting myself out there on a platform for other people to know me as me. And that's like a very weird feeling because I had never done that before. But I would not have arrived at any of that if I hadn't gone through the shit that I went through.
I'm going to posit something here. Instead of saying, because this is a very touchy topic with a lot of people, of the finding yourself movement type, it's got such a weird charged view on it as
Sure.
It's very Valley Girl sounding, find yourself, and then you go and get plastered and pass out in an alley somewhere.
Well, that's like chase your bliss.
Yeah. Instead, I'd like to posit, why don't you just call it self? You're realizing self. You're realizing what your meat is doing here.
So
what
I
you've
agree
been
with
through
you.
and
I agree with you. The problem with the language there, though, is it seems, on paper, it seems that it would be obvious who self is.
right.
You're the only one in your brain. You're the only one who knows, except for the fact that it's actually one of the hardest, most challenging things to do, is to actually realize and discover how to express and genuinely live into that.
Right.
It's really hard.
Well, instead of realizing yourself as one word, it should be realizing your space self.
Yeah.
Because everyone has a self. That's literally how we connect to everybody around us. Yourself is yourself, and myself is myself. And ourselves can be friends, or ourselves don't agree, or discuss later, or do this or that. And instead of, I finally found my whatever self, and then an older version was, I found my place in the world, or I found the job that defines, I'm defined now, and now I'm me. One, not a lot of people care.
Right.
And it's really hard to say. I'm so sorry.
Not a lot of people care.
At all. Mainly because they haven't found it yet.
And not only do a lot of people not care, but there are a decent amount of people too that just don't understand it when you do find that.
Well, I think understanding
yeah.
is in that word care. And care is another word that's thrown around not as respectfully as it should be. Care is a very deep and warm and very hot word of...
Well, it's an active, energetic word.
It is
It's not
active
passive,
It's
right.
not treated that
and
way.
effortful is
Yeah.
what care is. And some care is just, I watch dogs for people.
Well,
okay, but...
again, it's another one of those things where it's harder than people pretend. It's hard to care.
I think that's...
Like, you can only really care about, like, 9
So
things.
many, yeah.
Right.
You know? Like, because it takes a lot of energy. And that's why we have some, like, I always use the example of vegans. It's like, I know they're right. I know that animal farming and the meat production industry is evil. I really genuinely believe it's evil. But like, I just have so many bigger fish to fry for my personality that I can't be like, I'm still trying to like make sure that like gay people can get ordained and married in the church, you know, there are certain things I care about and certain things I just don't have the energy to care about, you know, even though I know that they're important. And the same thing with people. Like,
Well, that's another point of self. There's another point of yourself, is finding what all circles you can reach to, and then you have to tell yourself, you have to be able to tell you, hey, this is it. Sorry, dude, you're not going to be able to do that. If it happens, go you. That's a dream. Now we have goals. You have 1 through 12. You get through those and make another 12 or something.
well, so
but it's
I think we're arriving at a really good definition of like, how do you know when you've gotten there? And one, I would say, when you get there, you know. Two, but for somebody who's working on it and isn't there yet, is trying to grow in it, one of the real measures of it is the ability to, like what I just said, like, hey, I don't have the time and energy to care about that thing. I can't be all things to all people. And I know that I'm a hypocrite in saying it. I know that. But I also forgive myself, and I'm okay with that. I'm not like tearing myself up
Yeah.
for not being a vegan.
and
you
you're
know?
going to have to bear with me if we're having this conversation, and if not,
Right.
then we cannot have this
I
conversation.
still genuinely
Yeah.
conceive of myself as someone who should be respected and deserves love. And like, and Andy Richter You know, I look at myself in the mirror and I go like, I'm a lovable, fuckable human being. You know, like that's Andy Richter's like thing. Is like, I know I could lose some weight. I know I just had to shave my head because I'm going bald. I know I can get snippy and like give the cold shoulder when things aren't going my way. But that doesn't change the fact that I'm like a lovable, fuckable human being.
So to answer your like original question, the like, how do you know when you've gotten there? Like, I'm going to use Enneagram language just for you. But so my core fear as a type 2 is to be unloved. And so for me, kind of a like solidification, I don't know if that's a word, but you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, word.
Like kind of a solidification of like where I was at in that process. And I don't think it's ever fully over. I think you're constantly going to have to like work on it. But for me, like if my core fear is being unloved, I needed to be okay with prioritizing myself first instead of prioritizing other people. I needed to be okay with setting healthy boundaries and saying no. That's something I've struggled with my entire life, is telling people no because I'm terrified I'm going to disappoint them. I needed to be okay with allowing myself to feel things even when they feel selfish and irrational, and then working through those things. And so for me, it was looking at those core fear things and beginning to take steps towards like making them better. And now I'm much better about setting boundaries. I'm still not 100%, but I'm better. I'm more okay with saying no. And most importantly, I think I've taken a lot of steps to start prioritizing myself and my mental health first, and not just throwing it to the wayside, because I have a tendency to minimize my own feelings and my own needs and only focus on other people. And so allowing myself to be okay with, no, I need to think about me right now. Like that for me was a big part in knowing that I'm on the right track.
I think with the Enneagram, you're crawling towards a consensus of every person's different, which is the whole self argument.
Right.
And tying it all the way back to suffering is what we're talking about. Is we're all going through totally different things, and this is whatever you want to call it, a story or whatever, telling of one person's thing. Of this is almost the worst that can happen to you besides you dying.
Well, so
And
it is one person's thing, but the reason it is so exaggerated is to illustrate the point that the approach and the spiritual practice of what Job demonstrates is actually effective even under the most ridiculously extreme set of circumstances. And so the reason we're talking about all this is like the path. People think the pathway to like having themselves or realizing who they, like owning their self, self-possession is the word I use a lot. People think that self-realization comes through like follow your bliss, like find out what's important to you and do what you like and follow your like. And Joseph Campbell, his response to that statement is follow your blisters. Like actually take a look at the I can't remember. It's another great quote, but it's basically the answers you seek lie in the places that you do not want to look. The way towards depth and self-realization and fullness of life, and by the way, being a useful contributor to your family and your community and the people around you. All of those things, they do not happen by themselves. They happen from actually avoiding the pitfalls of vengeance, avoidance, and numbing, and instead following the Job example, which is straight up looking at this is terrible, and then later in the teaser for the coming weeks, in the next week we're going to look at his friend's response, which are good examples of temptations to those avoiding and all those other coping mechanisms. But then Job's final interaction with God, it is this direct, like, I'm not ignoring what's happening. I'm not letting you off the hook. You said you were good. You said you were all powerful. What the fuck? you know, like, and then God's response in that, and where the story ends. Believe it or not, from a traditional standpoint, Job is a comedy, not a tragedy. And that doesn't mean that it's hilarious and funny.
No.
It means that it actually has a happy ending where the
Right.
characters end up on top. They don't end up like all dead like Shakespearean tragedies. The characters that we care about end up on top. And how we get there is, I think, a really like brilliant. There's a reason it's lasted for over 2,500 years. You
I
know?
have something that's wiggling around up here.
All right, we'll see if this makes the cut because I'm worried about time. But go ahead.
Let me see if I remember now, because now I'm scared. No, in the suffering perspective of self, each person has their own thing. In self, to take one's self too seriously is almost so serious that it's a joke.
Oh, yeah.
Not only to yourself, to others. And if you're so oblivious to not see it, things start getting taken away from you, almost as if maybe it's a thing to show you none of this really matters. None of it really matters. Tear your robe. Sit in ash.
So there's a guy.
Be humble.
There's a guy who I'm remembering. I won't use his real name because I'm going to talk shit about him. He was a worship leader, and he just had this air of narcissism that was so poignantly, and let's call him, because his name actually is necessary for the punchline, so let's call him like Donnie Thompson, which is a totally made up name. If you're named Donnie Thompson, I am not talking about you.
Yes, we are.
And so my colleagues and I were watching, because it was online, we could watch the worship service, and we watched, and we're like, who is this asshole? He is so smug and like nasty up front. And then, heard all these other stories about, oh yeah, no, that guy's a total asshole, from people who worked with him and stuff. And then when we looked a little further in, we were like Facebook stalking and stuff. His website was thedonniethompson.com, and we were like, this guy's an asshole. But it was a primo example of what happens when you take yourself so seriously. And that was his only flaw. Like, he was a talented guy. He was attractive. He knew how he was comfortable in front of a crowd. He just took himself so seriously, and it was enough to be like, I don't know what it is, but I don't like this guy at all.
That's kind of the dark passenger that hangs around with the whole self-finding movement, or whatever you want to call it, which is why a lot of people take it for granted. It's not the right phrase, but it's all I have. Take it for granted from other people hearing it going, that's just a bunch of BS, because once you get there, then what do you do when you're there, type of thing. And whoever's talking, have only seen it go one way, which is they just become so confident in themselves and
well, it's the celebrity kind of thing. You start living in a bubble, you start getting insulated from real points of view and real perspective. And again, that's another way of avoiding and escaping.
Yeah.
It's another version of those coping mechanisms. And it's like, don't get me wrong, it's a hard message. Like, we call it the gospel, which means good news. It's actually really hard news that the way to life is death.
good is not always happy, by the way.
Like, it's
two different
hard.
words
Yeah.
for a reason.
And it takes effort. It takes humility.
Yeah.
It takes for me, it took like a serious breaking point, and that's kind of so like. Let's end with this. The framework of when things go wrong, let me look at what have I done, how did I contribute, is there something I can change or fix. That is, I think, an ideal framework to start with, and we should start there. That is that if you want to be a healthy, contributing, productive, happy person by and large, that's where you start. If you don't answer that, the next best framework, which is hard to hear, is this is an opportunity for me to demonstrate my character in horrible, difficult, painful circumstance.
Right.
And that through the demonstration of that character, not only will I see something new, but I will actually gain more character. I will gain strength and endurance and responsibility and trustworthiness, that I actually can grow in the middle of all of that. And that is the framework that Job has. And that is, I think, one of the key messages of this whole book. The framework of, it's called a test. But all a test is an opportunity for you to demonstrate the growth that you've achieved. And in so doing, you actually achieve more growth. Let's stop there.
All right.
All right.
Death, I come to take the soul, leave the body and leave it cold, to drop the flesh off of the frame. Dirt and worm both have a claim. Oh, death, oh, death, won't you spare me over till another year? Won't you spare me over till another year? Won't you spare me over till another